To Ride Love on Her Arms is a non-profit movement dedicated to presenting hope and finding help for people struggling with depression, addiction, self-injury, and suicide. Its aim is to encourage, inform, and inspire, as well as to invest directly into treatment and recovery. Its team have spoken to over 200,000 people in over 100 countries. Today, I'm having a conversation with Becky, one of their editors, to continue the discussion around mental health and lockdown. I think that the story of how the movement was born is just brilliant. Your founder wanted to help a friend who was struggling, and then after spending some days with her before she entered a center to treat her depression, he wrote about it and sold t-shirts to cover the cost of the treatment. And that's how it was born after he posted the story. That says a lot about the importance of communicating what's on someone's mind and in someone's heart.
Right. So going into the idea of communication, and as you mentioned, the original story is what we call it. That's at the heart of what To Write Love in Arms does. The name obviously stems from that as well. As you mentioned, Renee struggled with depression. She also struggled with self-injury. So with self-injury, that also connects to us saying writing love on your arms, on your skin versus, hurting, self-harm, so on and so forth. So that's where that comes from, which kind of stops people in its tracks as well, because it's such an interesting name, a long name as well. But yeah, so communication and connection are two very big things for our organization. We genuinely believe in the power of storytelling as well. So going back to someone opening up about their struggles, and then you essentially find that connection through shared experiences. When it comes to mental health, people can be faced with such a feeling of isolation and thinking they're alone in their struggles. So someone finding the courage to speak up about their struggles can break down countless barriers in terms of creating space for those emotions to live outside of ourselves. So like you said, that connection, and it stems from communication.
I have seen on your website that among many of the resources that you offer, there are mobile and social graphics with reaffirming quotes such as, "I am who I am and who I am is enough." People can download those for free and use them as wallpapers on social media, even on their Zoom backgrounds. To what extent do you think that positive words can be beneficial? And have you got any data around that?
I wouldn't necessarily say that we have hard data. More so, like you said, we said before, is that that storytelling and hearing from supporters and hearing from people that we try to help. But as you mentioned, words hold weight. Statements like that definitely have the potential to impact the person saying the words and also the person reading the words. So as you mentioned, people can go onto our site and there's printouts for coloring pages and stuff like that. And a big part of how we started was t-shirts. So a lot of our merchandise features statements that we believe to be true. And then you essentially have someone wearing those words. Person, obviously before coronavirus, you'd have someone walking down the street, passing you in a restaurant, and they're wearing those, and it kind of hits that person as a conversation starter.
Yeah.
And those words, I know that they can sometimes to people feel a little pithy, but when it's stemming from a source of compassion and support, there's comfort and hopefully truth to ultimately be found through those words.
Yeah. And you never really know who's going to see that, right? Maybe just someone who really needs to read something like that bumps into it. And
right,
voila.
absolutely.
Yeah. In a piece you wrote for COVID Action Network earlier this week, you emphasized on the fact that even though COVID comes with a terrible range of consequences, it might be propelling a growing conversation about mental health and about how important it is to pay attention to it and care for it. Where would you say the courage to speak during this time, this difficult time, is coming from? And do you feel like the media, for instance, is now more eager to address such topics?
At least from my perspective, I would say it's been a bit of a domino effect. People who have never addressed mental health, whether from a personal perspective or a general viewpoint, were suddenly speaking out about their anxiety and their fear, the depression they were facing due to physical isolation, their worlds basically being turned upside down and how that was impacting them mentally. And I honestly would say that it probably took flight on social media, and then news outlets started to take note, and it couldn't really be ignored. It was just kind of a wave. And we mentioned, as you said, in the blog that we posted on your site yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
There are very few good things to come out of this, but one of them is certainly the destigmatization of mental health. That's something that we've seen since, I mean, at least in the States here, since early March, and it's just continued. And now I think you have that courage of people speaking out, and then it becomes the awareness, and then it becomes the, okay, how do we help this? What actions do we take, whether as a whole society or an individual basis? How do I help someone in my life? It's a very broad aspect, and all different ways to address it, but it certainly becomes something that's on the radar of everyone at this point.
Yes, I mean, one of the key messages that you find across social media especially is you are not alone in this. I feel like whilst everyone is locked in, they are really seeking a community, someone to share their feelings with. In a moment when everyone should be physically alone, though, sometimes it can be a bit controversial, I think.
So we might have to be physically apart, as you mentioned, more than we're used to. But through technology, we're still able to connect. So I think our advice would be to utilize those outlets. So you can pick up a phone. I know that seems old school, but you can pick up a phone and talk to someone that brings you joy. I know I've seen a lot of, I think I saw an article recently that talked about how more people are actually picking up their phones, how the telephone call is making a comeback.
Wow.
So definitely picking up that phone. You can have that verbal communication versus just text message, but that's also an option. There's so many ways to virtually hang out. So obviously us doing this Zoom call right now, you're connecting with someone across the world, and you can easily do that with someone, with your friend who lives 30 minutes away. So it's utilizing those things that we have. And also, as you said, social media. So for us, a big part of Taloha is based on the internet. We do some events outside of that, but obviously with the pandemic, we've been unable to. A lot of our events have been canceled, but all of that is really heavily based on social media. So as long as you've got that internet connection, it's so easy to connect with someone, whether it's a friend or a stranger.
I'm wondering, have you had many new people reaching out to you on social media during this time?
I would say there's more people sending us emails, and as we mentioned before, being more vocal about what they're going through. A lot more comments on social media, Twitter, especially Instagram, lots of comments, lots of feedback in terms of how people are feeling, how they're dealing with it. And also we have what we call our info account, and everyone's welcome to email us. And we have a team of people who consistently read and respond to every single email. So there's definitely been an influx of that. And I would say it started to taper off now, but initially at the start of this, there was definitely more people reaching out, searching for some type of comfort and hope, for sure. And I know you mentioned talking about resources as well.
Yes.
So in terms of professional help, there's a lot of counselors who have moved to digital sessions. So people who are already in counseling are able to continue. People who are looking for help for the first time are able to start that off virtually. There's lots of free therapy and meditation apps you can access. We have a list of those resources on our site, taloha.com. And in terms of for professional help specifically, so say counseling and talk therapy, we would direct people to taloha.com/find-help. And there you can find local resources based on your location. And most of those are free or reduced cost.
Do you think that after the lockdown, or at least when things start to ease a little bit, people will continue to have the courage to speak up, that there will still be conversation, or that it will all just kind of go back to how it was before?
Obviously the hope is that it won't revert back to the way it was before, that people will stop talking and being so open about their struggles or loved ones' struggles. But there is, as you mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty in the future. So I would imagine that it continues. And a lot of people have talked about their anxiety continuing as we revert back to quote unquote normal life, or there's just that transition, and there's so much uncertainty. So I can't imagine people having a smooth transition as much as you'd hope for that. So I would definitely expect the conversation to continue. You may see an influx of it, maybe a little less as people start to feel more comfortable. But I think also in the process of this, they've come to realize that it's okay to talk about what they're going through, and there are resources there for them to access. So the hope would be that those tools are still in that toolkit, and that they realize that they can use those, that they don't have to just sit there collecting dust. They're there for a reason. So with anything, it doesn't have to be this pandemic or that anxiety. It could be another life situation where you could use help.
Yeah. For anyone who knows that a colleague, a friend, a family member, or anyone in their environment really is going through a tough time, maybe suffering really, what would be the first step from your perspective as an expert to help them without invading their privacy and without getting them to push you away?
Right. That's a great question. I know a lot of people will have that concern. They're afraid that by reaching out to a friend who they think is struggling, they might be afraid that they'll essentially push them away.
Yes. I feel like there's a lot of shame often from people who have mental health issues because they feel strange, or they feel like, oh, I'm clinically ill and it's wrong.
Right. So talking in that perspective, I would say the best thing to do is your language should always be non-judgmental. Come at that from a support of a friend. One of the big things is giving them the power to make the decision about how and when that conversation happens. But just by assuring them you'll be there if and when they're ready, and in hopes of that conversation happening, our advice would be for you to listen. Don't feel pressured to have every answer. I think that can also be intimidating for someone trying to help another person. Your presence is more important than having the perfect response. And as I said, non-judgmental, try to come from the perspective of being supportive. And oftentimes people are willing to get help, but they don't know where to look. So having some of those resources on hand is a great way to kind of encourage that next step. So like we mentioned, obviously our page, you can use that to search for local resources. And also we are very good friends with another organization called Crisis Text Line. And they have a few other options. And that's also something that's less invasive. So it's just a text messaging service. There's another person on the line. You can be anonymous if you want to. And all you need is your phone, and you can text someone and say, hey, this is going on. I can use your help. They'll either help you through it, or they will connect you to resources that would be fitting for your situation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So no judgment, support, and letting them know that you're there in case they want to talk. And also maybe being ready with some resources so that it's easier for them. If you could, in one sentence, encourage them somehow, anyone who might be watching this who needs a helping hand, what would you say?
That's a great question. One of our taglines that we always fall back to, and it's been a part of our story for a very long time, is help is real, hope is real. And in that, I would say those are two things to remember. Help exists, and it exists for you. And there are people out there who do want to help you. And there's always hope. Something that we've really relied on over the course of the last few months is that hope will not be canceled, is one of the things we've fallen back on. And it's just to remember that even in the midst of uncertainty, fear, and the unknown, there's still hope to be found. And it's just important to remember hope.